We keep hearing that specific breaches, data breaches to be exact, happen because human made an error. We see headlines all the time with things said that like 90% of data breaches happen due to human error. So I wanted to address in this presentation, why does this not make sense and why this is a wrong way to think about it. So I'm prepared the set of slides and my presentation, which is going to be presented at B-Sides Bristol, but also I wanted to share with my channel for people who are possibly will not be available to attend B-Sides Bristol. So I just wanted to expand why we keep hearing these statistics, why it's wrong, how can we fix it, and how we can get better security built for our organization. So a bit about myself. So my name is Marius Poskus. I'm a leading global vice president for cybersecurity for Global Financial Services. So essentially, I lead a global team as we expanding our fintech products across the globe. I'm also running a YouTube channel, which is MP Cybersecurity. I'm also run a mentoring classes at Caps Lock. So Caps Lock is a course for people trying to break into cybersecurity. I'm also a non-executive director at a company called CyberZulu. So we bring various products for small, medium business enterprises, especially for enterprises who can't afford to buy full-scale products. A bit about my career. So I started my career working in security operation centers, progressed through to managing and building security operation centers. I wrote a few documents how the best to architect your security operation center. As well, in my master's course, I wrote a dissertation about how to build threat-aligned SOCs using MITRE-ATT&ck. So I've done a lot of work with MITRE-ATT&ck framework. I also worked a lot across cloud security engineering, cloud security architecture, built application security programs for organizations, as well as penetration testing strategies for various companies. So let's dive right into why human error breaches are bull. So most of you guys probably seen the headlines. As you can see in the pictures attached, either 90% of breaches are caused by human error or 95. All of these statistics are out there, and most of the headlines feature that specific breaches happen due to human error. And I think this is a wrong way to think about it. I think there's much more behind that. And we as an industry, we need to do a lot more work to get ahead of it and to stop relying on lazy tactics by attributing all of the breaches to human error. They're not happen just because of human error. We need to understand why specific errors humans make. We need to understand human behavior, human factors. What can we do to get ahead of those errors, and how we can align our security programs that does not allow human to make simple errors that can lead to breaches. So it's talking about, how do we build defense in depth? How do we stop, talking about, I hear a lot of security professionals always discuss things like, humans are our last line of defense. They shouldn't be the last line of defense. They are not security professionals. Yes, they need to know about security, but we should build a program. We should align our processes, procedures, tools to better help humans make the correct decisions. And I think the big problem as well is in that, because most of these headlines are made by vendors. Vendors try and scaremonger companies into buying their tools because potentially the tool will save all your problems. And that's not the case. It's very rarely you can solve specific problems just by adding a tool, the shiny Blinker 3000, that's going to solve all of your problems. That's not the case. And we'll address that throughout our slides. So let's look at why these statistics are the problem. Why is that a problem? So what I just alluded to. So industry is led by vendor marketing snake oil. And what I mean by that is just most of the vendors, or some of the vendors, are relying on colorful statistics to show how their product can solve all of your problems. And that's where the problem is in itself, because vendors publish headlines such as, oh, our tool will solve, your risk or reduce your risk by a specific percentage, or reduce, human errors, reduce incidents, reduce vulnerabilities. These tools can't do and can't solve their problems by themselves. Tools need to be managed by people. They need to have processes in place to making sure we get the best return on investment. And the problem is that vendors in some cases do not intimately understand security market or problems that various companies face. And the problem is we can't use statistics as a whole, because it varies by industry, it varies by company. It's very hard to measure how a specific tool will help or hinder your security program. These statistics do not help. So the second part of the problem is that people tend to use easy route. And what do I mean by that? The easy route is that it rarely, if ever, and we go into the further slide, is that people rarely use the proper root cause analysis to actually understand why and what made people to make a specific decision. It really boils down to, I always say to people, the best way to address specific issues is the end, but actually issue can showcase, a whole heap of missed processes, missed procedures, things that are done wrong in the organization. So for me, any particular issue such as vulnerability, risk, a problem is a thread that we can pull in and go deeper and deeper to understand. We need to understand the human factors. So, it's a very simple scenario. For example, if a person who works in your finance department, and they might get, a plethora of emails, hundreds potentially emails of invoices every single day. And invoices are normally sent as an attachment to an email. So if a person during the day has to open hundreds of emails and hundreds of attachments, how can you rely on him to make sure that they do not click on any phishing emails, they do not open any malicious PDF files or Word files? We can't rely on that, and therefore we need to understand the human behavior. We need to understand the pressures that people face in their jobs. What do they do day to day, and how we can build tooling, our processes to make sure that we don't rely on that one person of not opening that malicious email. How we can build better programs, how we can align our tooling to help people make correct decisions. For another very simple point in here to make is our industry is very mature comparing to well-established disciplines. So if we compare cybersecurity to somewhere like aviation or manufacturing or automobile industry, you don't hear things like human errors. And we don't do enough user attributed testing. So I'll give you a simple example. For example, if aircraft company is developing a new aircraft, they do tremendous amount of testing, especially within their cockpit. So for example, they will do a number of tests during cockpit to make sure that all of the gauges and all of the button alignment has the least amount of possibility to incur human error. They will test with the feedback of the human who's potentially flying the plane to make sure and understand how people react in various scenarios, which controls are the most necessary, and where do they have to be positioned around the cockpit to ensure that there's the least amount of error possible. And we in security don't really do that. And that's the step where we need to take, where we need to align the people thinking, align the human factors in all of our solutions and all of our technology. And we need to build solutions with human feedback, with humans that use it every day and understand what factors they have to consider when making specific decisions. We need to understand the company culture. For example, if somebody is dissatisfied with their job, if they're not feel like they are empowered, feel that they're like supported, that increases the chance of human error. So how do we can build a culture in an organization that people feel supported? People actually will do a much better job. Also, wrongly, people turn to technology to solve problems. And what do I mean by that is that, people who don't intimately understand how we build programs, how do we build processes, they are allured with that vendor marketing jargon that says, you have a problem with risk, our tool will, solve your risk or reduce your risk by a number, by X percentages, which is not the case unless you can map all of the processes, understand the organization. It's very hard to just bolt on a tool that will solve all of your problems. The second thing is, when we start talking about tools, especially, when we go into further questions about security program building, we need to discuss things like defense in depth. There's a lot of people talking about defense in depth, but defense in depth can't be a silo or mishmash of tools. The problem is normally, yes, we can layer tools, but unless these tools integrate with each other, unless they talk with each other, unless they build a picture of the context between them, that's not a layer of defense. If you just put 3 different tools that do not support each other, do not talk with each other, do not complement each other, that's not defense in depth. That's just a mishmash of defenses. And what I alluded to, the most important part of security starts with people. Starts with people, processes, and only then comes technology. We can never put technology first. It's always first, you have to get the right people, you have to build the right processes within the business, you have to understand the business context, and only then you can use the help of technology to help you solve certain problems. And some of these reasons, that's why organizations are failing. That's why we keep using the easy route of blaming humans for making an error. We need to understand why this error happens, and not necessarily, forcing the headlines that, particular breach was just because of human error. It's easy to do that, but to actually understand the factors that led to human making error, that's where the work needs to be done, and that's what needs to be reflected moving forward. So let's address why this keeps happening, why we keep failing on the same errors, and why we're not learning from them. First and foremost, I think the biggest problem is that we build systems without thought about human behavior. And, in my programs and any solutions that we build, I try to invest as much as possible time in understanding the stakeholders, understanding the end user that will be using our platform, our tooling, and how does it affect their behavior. So that's a very key component to understand, making sure that, we can't build security for the sake of security. The security has to be usable. It has to be, achievable. It has to be uninterruptible for people to do their day-to-day tasks. So that's a key component of understanding how we build systems, how do we implement systems, and also how we publish those systems to make sure that people can actually work with them. It's not a hindrance. I always say to people, that goes into even your, policy procedure creation. You have to understand what is the impact of that specific policy, and can it be adhered to? Because there's no point creating a policy or procedure that can't be adhered to, or people won't follow it. It becomes too cumbersome. People are creatures of habit. They will find the easiest route to make sure their job gets done. So we have to think about all of these behaviors. Another big problem is, which I alluded a little bit, is culture. Mistakes are normally an opportunity to blame, to scapegoat, or to punish people, and that's wrong. And that's just a simple fact of what kind of culture you are building within your organization. And I always say to people, it alludes to a few things, like organizations are where they're moving from DevOps now, for example, into DevSecOps. It's not a project that you can implement overnight. DevSecOps, it's a way of working. It's not just you plug in tools and we're going to start doing security within DevOps. It needs a big culture shift, and that shift has to come from top down. So unless you get a support from top all the way down, and they're actually gonna showcase how security is important amongst the organization and amongst the senior officials, amongst every single employee, it's very hard to get traction and it's very hard to get anything implemented. So it's very important, what kind of culture is it within your organization? Are you using more of a carrot or more of a stick? And those organizations that use stick, it very rarely leads to a collaborative effort. It's always a time to blame and scapegoat. So people are not interested anymore to help security, not interested to point out problems, because they are afraid for their safety, for their job safety, and for potential to be blamed or punished. Another big problem is, there's normally a disconnect between policy creation and how people work. So, and that's one of the bigger problems. I always allude to people and say to people that most of organizations, the way they work, we have, for example, a governance, risk, and compliance department in most organizations, and then we have an engineering department. And the problem is, most of the policies, most of the procedures usually are built by governance, risk, and compliance people, but they rarely interact with engineering. So how can they build a policy, for example, for an engineering team without knowing intimately what engineers do day to day? So it becomes a disconnect. It becomes a policy that can't work in live environment, because it does not reflect how engineers work. So it's very important to get a cohesion, amongst the stakeholders, and always, interact with them to make sure that that policy can align to what's actually happened, to the way the people are working in engineering departments. The systems we build as well does not always match our mental model. So that goes back into sort of engineering and DevOps practices. The problem we sometimes have is that when we build a bigger, and especially when you expand the systems into quite considerable size, you have a problem that particular teams work on their own component within the system. But unless you understand the system cohesion and how it comes together as a whole, it's very hard to understand and picture how does that going to work in production, how does it going to work in development, and how is that system is going to interact between various components that have been built by different teams. And that's why we normally intend to have problems. We have problems with resiliency, we have the problems with uptime, we have problems with particular vulnerabilities, outdated images, outdated code, because there is no cohesion. Sometimes, how do we know that a problem with a specific component, how is that going to impact the whole system or other components? We need to understand that security is normally, a product that we build for our employees as well as customers. So we can never neglect their input into security work. We have to make sure that security can be usable and security works for them. And I like to go into, I was a big fan of chaos engineering practices. So, I like to start experimenting and actually analyzing how we building our security solutions. So another problem that I often see is that we really test and experiment with our controls and security solutions to actually understand whether they work as intended. So, sometimes, we stand up a scene, we built a bunch of nice, rules, but actually test day in, day out to make sure that rules works as intended. Making sure, for example, our EDR solutions detect specific things as intended. Making sure our, web application firewalls blocks the intended, bad malicious traffic. So that's a practice of, continuously testing and learning of how our solutions work to make sure that it delivers the best product possible for all of our staff, but as well as for our customers. So how do we solve these problems, which I just mentioned? So I think everything starts with the culture within an organization. So as we just discussed, you have to start with the culture. You have to embed security culture within an organization. You have to push security all the way to the top on the agenda and making sure that senior executives and board members understand the importance of security and they are on the same page. because as soon as we can embed the culture of security where security issues are not neglected, security issues are supported, and it's shown all the way from the top, it will have a tremendous push around the organization of how security culture breathes throughout the organization. That's the most important start. Also, I think most of the people are talking nowadays about this, but security is no longer, it can't be no longer a department of no. Security has always been told, to say no to the business when there is a specific risk. But depending on organization maturity, depending on where you are, and depending how you understand the business, you can't just keep saying no to the business executives. Because what happens is, over time, when you keep saying no, you are no longer listened to. You are no longer asked for an advice. You normally become a person who is bypassed in the decision making, and the solutions happen without you. So the goal is nowadays to say yes, but always have a specific security requirements or specific reasons how you can say yes. So say yes, but these are the security requirements, or yes, we can say yes as long as you guys can inbuild these specific requirements into your solution or into your product. Another very important bit is that most organizations have security awareness as a sort of annual checkbox training exercise where somebody's been sent an hour of videos that are boring, or a long list of articles to read once a year. The problem is, people normally within a month or two have forgotten all of this training. So the way we can emphasize and the way we support the training and awareness and understanding around security between our staff is breaking down that annual is training into sort of bite-sized, frequent awareness tips that are relatable and personable. And that's the key point, is building security programs and security awareness training that people can relate to their personal lives, relate to their family, to their personal bank accounts. How a specific, whether it's phishing campaigns, whether it's social engineering campaigns are happening out there in the wild, what threat actors are using. So these bite-sized pieces, it can be a newsletter sent every week, every couple of weeks, which just has a couple of sentences, maybe a couple of images that it becomes such more memorable. And especially when you relate to personal things that people see in the news, how fraud happens and things like that, it normally tends to stick around for a lot longer. People understand why security is important, how the security can help the business, but also in their personal life. Another very important thing, which we kind of discussed in length now, is consider human factors and behavior, patterns in your security program. Understand how your staff are behaving. What day-to-day challenges they might have. How can security support specific business units? When you come to aid to specific business unit, you can become an ally. So that's how you build stakeholder engagement, build relationships across various business units, that security is an ally to the business, how we can help growth and prosperity through aligning security. And another thing is I guess it depends on what maturity level you are, but organizations normally, and especially now we're talking about agile, DevOps, people tend to have a lack of documentation, and that's where the problem is. It doesn't have to be something very cumbersome, but there is ways of working how we can start document procedures, document processes. It doesn't have to be documents. There is Jira, Confluence. There's various ways how we can create specific procedures and share wide and far among the organization. So how we can create processes and procedures that aligns to how business works, aligns to an understanding of how humans behave in our organization, but also helps to show them the repeatable behaviors that security is built in within them. So that's the kind of the few ways how we can do that. How else we can solve it? So we talked about errors, how it's normally is a way to punish or blame someone. once you start building security culture, the culture shift once it starts, it's always should be a message around the organization that failure is an opportunity to learning. So instead of blaming someone, how can we understand why specific errors happen with the organizations, how we can learn from them, and how we can improve the business processes, how we can use the experimentation, and the key point is collaborative feedback loops to make sure that we iterate and we get better. There's various books that talks about habits, talks about improvement. We don't have, sometimes people focus too much about spending too much energy for looking for the new big thing, for the new big breakthrough. It doesn't have to be a massive breakthrough. We just need to get better 1% at a time. How we can do a tiny adjustments that will help make us more secure, understand why the particular failures happen. Another very important aspect is how we can align security, accountability, and situational awareness with responsibility. So this is mainly the one that I guess we've all been in organizations where we walk into, and whether we're talking with HR or any specific other business unit, and say how we can help them, or how do they should embed security into their processes. And normally the answer you get is, oh, security is not our problem. I thought that security will fix this particular problem. And no, and that's where the culture shift is normally I tend to push, is that security has to become a quality feature, a quality metric. Security is not security by itself. Is if you're building something quality, security has to be built in. I always ask people, when I'm faced with that situation, I said, when you left your home this morning, did you hire someone to lock the door for you? Did someone lock the door for you? You lock the door for yourself. So that's part of the security. So whatever they do within their business unit, they are in charge of their own security for their own business unit. We are there to advise and to help and showcase what standards of security they need to align, but security is their responsibility. Another important part is to incentivize collaboration, experimentation, and business level improvements. So, I'm always faced with organizations that, it's normally, a big massive sign in the kitchen or somewhere, in their values that say we support collaboration. But collaboration can't be just a sentence on the canteen or company cafeteria. You have to actually incentivize this. And the problem is, normally, if you are in an organization where, say, there is specific competitions, there is specific goals or targets that everyone has, and if company supports, say for example, sales department, if the best salesman wins some kind of prize, there's very rarely you're going to have a collaboration in that business unit, because there is no incentive for me to share my ideas with someone who can win the prize. I'm not going to win the prize. There's only one person who's going to win the prize. So you have to go from the top down how you're going to incentivize collaboration. So you have to go away from competition, but incentivizing knowledge sharing, how incentivize everyone that brings new and fresh ideas. You have to create that culture of continuous learning. And then important is fast and transparent security verification, how we can verify that security is there and as intended. And that goes through through the culture, through how we build transparent feedback loops, how we engage the stakeholders who are using that security to make sure we get transparent security feedback and verification to make sure that it works as intended. So another aspect of this, and how I like to do security nowadays, is I'm always been a fan of how we can build modular sort of security pieces within our environment, and actually share it within, whether it's within development, whether it's within engineering, whether it's within various business units, of how we can share the security with them, so they don't need to always interact with security. And that's the goal. We can build things like RACI matrix that has the least privileged assignments in the join as movers leavers process. So it's a simple task, but it can create a tremendous time saver, for example, at your IT departments, because normally unless you have a specific least privilege role matrix assignment for specific business units, it can lead to error because, someone joins a business, someone moves departments, how do IT knows what roles or what permissions they should have? It normally becomes a process of discovery or process of guessing, Also, how we can define, our virtual machine build security requirements. So, we can build secure images that can be shared within development, within DevOps, within IT teams to make sure that security is designed from the get-go. Whether we use CIS hardened images with a specific level, whether, how we can define, what's kind of secure Linux image, what's secure Windows image, create a processes where images and the tools for others to be used, so they don't need to always create a cumbersome engagement with security. How we can create laptop or desktop gold images as well. How we can define, for example, nowadays you pick something like Microsoft Intune, you can build autopilot deployments of specific security requirements where you send the laptop to the user. All they need to do is they input their username, password, and the laptop can build itself as long as everything is predefined. Building defining API security requirements for your development teams. Define how firewalls, how network security groups, application security groups, or web application firewalls, what's their security requirements, how we can define specific processes, when you are allowed to open the firewall and when not, what kind of rules should always be provisioned there, how we can define our corporate application whitelisting requirements. So it's very important task, but if we can define those processes, we can define sort of security components that can be shared between the business. It can help save time, it can help fasten innovation, but also it can help build security from the get-go, from all the way from the design stage. You can also define database build security requirements for all of the teams. And if you share somewhere like Confluence, you don't need to send the document to them all the time when they ask. You can just create a flow of specific requirements that is shared within the teams, and it's easy accessible to everyone who is working on specific builds. Another part is, I've talked about, culture. I talked about, how security goes from top down. And one of the important parts, I guess, is how we can embed and how we can gain traction and understanding why security is important is an executive charter. So executive charter is something that, there's various security professionals advertise for, and that's why I've embedded in my security programs. But it's very important document that's normally should be signed by your senior executive team, and that document essentially outlines responsibilities for the senior executives and how security program will work, how it's defined, what's the scope of it. So normally has the first statement of it normally is that the overall responsibility of security sits within the board and the C-suite, and they essentially mandate the management. They delegate that information security responsibilities to security function with the agreed scope. So what's the scope of our information security management system? They normally delegate the authority. So security function have the authority to implement that security program. Normally we will request and define the resources and support that we will need to implement the program, so we can hold the senior executives accountable in our program build. There's two important factors that I always put in this executive charter. So first and foremost is that management will instruct all project leads to involve security from the project initiation. So every project that is initiated within your organization, project lead has to initiate two-way communication with security, so to make sure that security is addressed within the project lifecycle. And secondly, security function will have control over change management. So essentially we have a way to say yes or no to specific changes based on specific risk. We always have to put in there, obviously, security can be overruled But whenever security needs to be overruled, there is a formal process to be followed that is evidenced and documented. And then another very important part is, because some organizations, as you probably guys are aware of, there is politics, there is various kind of games going on between, IT department, depending whether, organization is where CISO reports. If CISO reports to the CIO, there's normally competing, priorities. So the last point that says security function will have direct visibility in all of the infrastructure, projects, and application. And the thing is, the key point is, it's without IT interference. So IT cannot stop us from gaining visibility into all of the infrastructure, projects, as well as applications. So that's a very important part of the charter, how we can help create a culture and understanding of where security sits, but also it help us to deliver the program and get the visibility where we need to get the visibility. And then how we do that is we essentially go from firefighting to continuous improvement. I think the problem is nowadays that breaches are, they keep happening, they keep popping up into the headlines, is that some security professionals tend to spend too much time firefighting. They are too much involved in looking for the next tool, building the bigger team to make sure that they can solve more incidents, they can solve more risks, they can patch more vulnerabilities. But I always like to flip it upside down. So for me, tools are a detection process, so they detect a vulnerability. But for me, when that vulnerability starts trending or risks start appearing or there is an incident, my main and focus is to understand why they happened in the first place. What can we do? Where is the process broken? And how we can fix that process. So, for example, there's vulnerability. So obviously there's a patch management process somewhere broken. Maybe that particular virtual machine or server is not enrolled in automatic patch updates. Maybe there's been missed an immutable update. So let's look at the process. Why there is all of a sudden there is a number of vulnerabilities on that specific machine. So understanding how we can build better processes, understanding why did this incident happen, is there a specific process that been neglected by a specific user that created this incident, why there is code vulnerabilities, do we need to improve our development code practices, how we can create another training material, how we can define more security requirements, and whether it's API code, whether it's API build, the code build, how we can review our standards and our CI/CD pipelines to make sure that the specific vulnerabilities, whether they are high or critical risk, can't be pushed into the merge, into our pipelines, they can't be admitted. So, instead of spending more money and hiring more people to deal with these sort of operational issues, we need to analyze why they happen in the first place and try and fix the business processes. Normally what it is, it leads to a lot more work up front, but normally it yields much more benefits down the line. If we can go from firefighting and actually fixing processes that creates issues in our environments, we will be in much better place. And this is actually the way that we can get ahead of all of these headlines, actually pulling the threads on the things that are happening and understanding the actual root cause, why they're happening, and how we can fix the processes that started them in the first place, instead of just patching the machines, creating a plethora of tickets for IT to patch it. Understand why we need to patch, why is automatic patching is not happening, why there is specific failed processes, when maybe somebody bypassed the process, how we can refine and create those learning feedback loops to continuously improve our processes to make sure we reduce the issues down the line. So hopefully you guys learned something. Obviously this is for B-Sides Bristol, so obviously there's going to be asked questions for people from the audience, but those of you who are watching at home, please comment if you have any questions, if you have any comments, You can also find me on LinkedIn, so please reach out. I'm always happy to discuss any security topics. Hopefully you find something interesting in my slides, and thank you for your time.